Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avergan. This day, April 7th, 1926, lightning strikes an oil storage tank in San Luis Obispo, California, and set off a series of explosions and fires. We'll get into the details here, but basically this resulted in what can best be described as a river of fire flowing several miles to the ocean. Incredibly destructive, and this at a time when this region was one of the busiest oil areas in the world. So let's talk about what came to be known as the 1926 Tank Fire, California's oil industry, the ecological effect, and, a defining relatively early industrial disaster. So here to discuss, as always, Nicole Hemmer of Vanderbilt and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
I just happened to have driven past through San Luis Obispo a couple weeks ago, and I knew we were going to do this episode, so I was just sort of thinking about that. And I know this is contentious, what I'm about to say, like Central California. It's, south of, I think the Central California coast, north of, obviously, Los Angeles, north of Santa Barbara. Obviously, this is oil country. I'll just say it's an interesting thing to me that, the couple times I've been to Santa Barbara, which is, one of the most beautiful places in the world and totally idyllic. And then you look out over the ocean and there's all these oil rigs, dotting the water. And I've always been like, gosh, this is the perfect view. And then poor Santa Barbans have to live with staring at oil. But anyway.
You're a NIMBY and it's not even your backyard.
Exactly. But, I suppose that is part of it because, the ecological impact of this is a big part of the story. But, if people can picture that sort of green rolling hills and Central California coast, it's very beautiful. But what goes down when lightning strikes this oil storage facility?
I mean, it's exactly what you would expect to happen. You have this highly combustible fuel, you have lightning raining down from the sky, and as soon as it combusts, it turns into, it's not just that it turned into a fire, because all of the oil combusts and it turns into this big rolling fire. But it is a fire that is being fed by so much fuel and that gets so big that it creates kind of its own ecosystem. It's throwing off Fire-Nados and it is spilling black smoke into the sky and spilling oil into the ocean. It's a kind of turbulence that you wouldn't expect.
Oh my God. I mean, it is, I would think apocalyptic to look at, I'm sure, because flames are 1,000 feet high in the sky. You have over 8 million barrels of oil just lost. And then the fire is soaking up so much oxygen that windows are breaking, houses collapse, trees get uprooted, animals have soot all over them. That stuff gets in your lungs. It's extremely, extremely deadly. And this covers about 900 acres of land. So we're talking about a massive space that's just engulfed in flames.
Yeah, and there's smoke, that's being seen all as far as Fresno, which is, people know, very far away and kind of over a series of mountains. And there's Fire-Nados breaking out and destroying cottages in addition to the explosion itself. As you were saying, Kellie, the blast fallout from the explosion. How do you put out a fire like this?
Not easily.
The answer is you don't, really. I mean, this is one of those things where it's so dangerous to even be near it. They have some newsreel footage of the fire back in the day, and even trying to get that newsreel footage was a pretty dangerous affair because of all of this turbulence around the fire. And part of what they did was they tried to redirect some of it into the ocean, dumping oil into the ocean. Can
we pause on that plan there? Which again, I'm no environmental disaster cleanup expert here, but part of it was, this oil is fueling this fire, so let's get the oil out of here. So they start pumping it down towards the ocean, and that is where we get the river of fire that I made reference to in the intro, right? Because now that catches on fire, and there's as it's flowing into the ocean, it's on fire, and you get this river of fire going all the way down into the ocean. Not to mention the oil is polluting the ocean.
Yes, and
You
the
can't
smoke.
bring the water to the fire.
No.
Take the fire to the water.
That's exactly right.
It is a little reminiscent of the molasses tragedy that we talked about in Boston, probably around the same time, where you just see black molasses flowing through the street, seen like black or seen like almost like lava, if you will, like flowing through the street. It's terrifying. But the funny thing is that you don't actually have to be close to this in order to feel like the destruction, feel the soot, feel the smoke in the air, get the heat that's coming off that. I mean, it takes a while for this to die down. Actually, about 2 weeks for the fire to really get contained.
So we should layer in a little context here. And we actually got an email from a listener, about this story. And they put it in, Mike, thank you for emailing us. But, Mike talked about the disaster, but also put in a note about the larger context, which is that in the early 1900s, and decades leading up to this, Port San Luis was the busiest oil port in the world, and obviously California's oil industry is just taking off at this point. And so as we see throughout these kind of industrial disaster stories, I think you have this point where economic development is racing way far ahead of the ability to regulate it and to put in safety precautions and so forth. And that, of course, leads to moments like this. And I would say, this seems like a freak disaster and so forth, but I would say the real kind of thing to pause and think about is the aftermath and the cleanup or lack thereof, which lingers to this day. But I was kind of really surprised to hear that San Luis was the busiest oil port in the world for that first decade of the 1900s.
You're used to hearing my voice on the world, bringing you interviews from around the globe.
And you hear me reporting environment and climate news. I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. We're now with you hosting The World Together. More global journalism with a fresh new sound.
Listen to The World on your local public radio station and wherever you find your podcasts.
This is not just a forest fire, right? Like when you add oil into this, it makes the cleanup so much more expensive, timely, toxic. And so having to clean up a mess like this is, it's not just a matter of rebuilding. Some of these places to this day are still deemed as like really, really toxic. That oil is almost impossible to deal with in some instance. And so everything gets magnified because of that.
Right. They don't do cleanup right away because they decide that it is probably just easier to let the oil sit there than to try to remove it. And so it just continues to soak into the ground for decades. The farm is rebuilt, oil operations continue. And finally, in the 2000s, there has been a real push for Chevron, who acquired the company that was responsible for this, to begin remediating the land. But that kind of remediation is just going to take an incredibly long time for the reasons that you've mentioned, Kellie. Like it's toxic soil that has to become detoxified. Maybe goop can help out.
Well, yeah. And I mean, and there were reports for decades and decades after there was still oil. You could see oil bubbling up from the ground that had sort of soaked in. And then obviously the ecological impact, the animal life and the wetlands in that area are a big concern. I mean, this reminds me a little bit of something that I've been aware of and covered a little bit in New York, but there's the Gowanus Canal here in New York, and then there was this massive oil spill in Greenpoint in Newtown Creek, and it's similar in that you sometimes hear the argument that the process of cleaning this up will be more destructive than just letting it be there. And like, for instance, in the case of the Gowanus Canal, it's like all this industrial waste is sort of sunk to the bottom and like settled and compressed, and it's there. It's still very toxic, but the process of now thinking about, are we going to go dredge it all up? What will that do? And so it's like, this feels like similar to that at some level, and maybe even some logical level, people are like, we just kind of gotta slowly back away.
It's kind of like therapy. Sometimes you just have to leave the stuff alone. Don't pick at it.
Don't.
Oh, I know. I know. I mean, if you think about too, this is the 1920s. So what technology do they have available to them that would make this cleanup efficient or better? I mean, even in this day, even in our current day, like cleanup is extremely difficult and costly, and in some cases impossible. So I don't know, how they would have done it back then, but certainly even today, cleanup is like costly. It's just costly on all fronts.
I mean, the answer is don't let something like this happen in the first place, not come up with a better way to clean it up.
Yeah, that's true. Well, that's true. But how do you stop lightning from striking? I mean, this is one thing if like kids are playing around and they set a fire, some arsonist or something like that. But yeah, I mean, nature strikes. What can you do about that?
Yeah, it's the combination of like you don't have the technology necessarily, but you also don't have the sense of social responsibility. And so you don't have like the regulation that comes into play. I would imagine that the way you prevent it is how you store the oils, that if it is struck by lightning, it doesn't catch on fire. But it's the 1920s, they're just starting to do regulations on things like smokestacks and things like that. So it'll be a while before they get into the oil fields.
So, we talked about how this had a massive impact in the moment. I mean, just the idea that this fire created its own basically weather system for a week or two is kind of stunning. But the scars of it, as we're saying, are still there. And so I should have done this on my road trip, but I didn't go pay a visit. Maybe I shouldn't have done this on my road trip. But, you can go there. You can still see glass from the explosion. The soil is still considered toxic. It is now Chevron's responsibility to try and clean it up. They own the land. But you can also go on Google Maps. Maybe we'll tweet this out, but you can also go on Google Maps and see the like scars basically of this oil field and really get a sense of kind of the size of the tankers in the area.
Those were huge. They're huge. I mean, I'm looking at this image and it looks like someone has taken like, I don't know, like baking cups that you would cut biscuits with and like put little circles into the ground. You see like, I don't know, maybe it's like 7 or 8 different circles, but these are massive facilities.
Yeah, and it's sort of right there in the middle of San Luis Obispo, and there's communities around there and development, and there's also the little. Well, again, we'll send this out. We'll send the link out, but you can poke around into the area. But one of the more interesting tidbits is there's like open space and greenery near there, and there's like hiking trails, and it's just the name of it, I believe, is just South Hills Open Space, which is as vague as it could get, because if you called something like Tank Fire Memorial Hiking Trail or Fire Volcano Hills, people probably might not go hiking there. So it's just open space. No need to ask any more questions. Enjoy your walk.
Don't ask why it's open. Just go.
But anyway, if any listeners from the area want to tell us what it's like actually on the ground there, we'd love to hear that. But anyway, that brings us to the end of this episode. And thank you to Mike for cluing us into the Tank Fire story. Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you as always.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
Radiotopia. From